Welcome back to the Calculated Risk Podcast. I am Tyler Shoemaker, joined as always by Kelley Ford. We had a great, we talked about this. Everyone said it was going to be a boring weekend. It was actually pretty exciting. I mean, Alabama had got all they could handle from South Florida. We had a lot of exciting games. Florida, Tennessee was exciting. Kelley, what were your initial thoughts here on week 3 before we get into our biggest risers and fallers?
Yeah, week 3 was what we expected, Tyler. When everything seems sleepy and we don't have all the high-profile matchups, that's when chaos kind of takes control, and we got a little bit of that. It looked like halfway through the afternoon slate, we might get a little bit more of that. I even tweeted about it. We did not end up getting full-on 2007 chaos, but yeah, I mean, from the Missouri walk-off field goal to Florida extending that streak of beating Tennessee in the swamp, you just can't beat them down there. It was a fun week of college football. We only get 13 full college football Saturdays. We can't take it for granted. I'm glad I was locked in from beginning to end. I know you were too, Tyler. So yeah, another good week and ready to talk about what it did to the numbers.
All right, yeah, let's get into it. Let's look at the good stuff first. Let's see who our models increased the most after this week. And a point that I think we both want to get across here is just because these are the biggest upgrades after week 3, from week over week doesn't necessarily mean that the increase or decrease is only because of what happened on the field in week 3. You have to remember that all of the results prior to this week are not static. It's dynamic. So what you did in week 1, week 2 is now catching up. It's being weighted more heavily in our formulas. So we'll get into this. On my top 10, I had Duke as my number 1 riser, not necessarily because they destroyed Northwestern, which was pretty much expectation. Now the on-field data for this season is being weighted so much more heavily than the preseason data, in my numbers at least. So now Duke kind of gets a delayed bump. Clemson looked really good against Florida Atlantic. Unfortunately, I had a Florida Atlantic bet that had no chance of cashing. So Duke kind of got a delayed bump here for the Clemson performance. So just keep that in mind as you're evaluating this, as we're going through this. We don't want everyone to think like, why is this team up or down after that game? So it's not necessarily just that game. It's what you've done this season to date. But we'll get into, I'll run through my top 10, let Kelley run through his. I had Duke, Boston College, Navy, Texas State, Ohio State, who was on the biggest fallers last week, New Mexico State, who I feel like makes a list one way or another every week, Coastal Carolina, Oklahoma, who, spoiler alert, is the new number 1 in TSI, Cal, and Colorado State. No surprise there. Kelley, anything jump out on mine before we get to yours?
You buried the lead. Oklahoma is your new number 1, huh? I mean, to me, that's the headline here, and I'm going to touch on what the opening comments too. But Oklahoma all the way up to number 1. Where were they last week, Tyler? Ordinal rank wise.
Yeah, I don't have that. You do a much better job of keeping your rankings. I keep the rating record. I don't keep the ranking week over week. I believe they were fifth or 6th in that range. So they did jump up. They are just 0.2 rating points ahead of Ohio State, who's my number 2 team. It was funny before we get further into this, but just on the Oklahoma front, everyone last week was getting on our case about Alabama not dropping far enough. Well, I mentioned a delayed response. Alabama, they obviously didn't look good against South Florida again. So the combination of the Texas game last week, South Florida this week, Alabama tumbled to number 13 in my rankings. So just something to keep in mind there. But yeah, Oklahoma, new number 1 by the skin of their teeth.
I love that, and it makes sense too. You talk about you phase out preseason priors more quickly than I do, and it's not right, wrong. It's just the way that we do it. We do it differently, and because of that, Oklahoma has been very strong. For me, they're my biggest risers this season, Tyler. So if you look at KFord preseason ratings versus KFord week 4 ratings now, Oklahoma has improved the most over the course of that time. They're up 9.7 points for me total. They don't make my list this week of top 10 biggest risers within this week. They're just off that, but they are my biggest riser over the course of the year now. So when you're looking at just in-season data as you are, and you consider the fact that these other top contenders at the top of our power ratings all really struggled on the field this week, with the exception of Ohio State. All the other ones, though, really struggling. It makes sense that Oklahoma would jump up to your number one. So before I get into my top 10, I just want to agree with what you said, Tyler, and expound on it a little bit as we're looking at the rating movement week over week. As Tyler said, it's not just, okay, we look at the rating 2 weeks ago, we bring in this week's worth of data, and now we have this week's updated power ratings. We phase it in and out differently. Tyler phases out his preseason priors more quickly than I do. But what we're doing is you're changing the percent weight that preseason is getting assigned as you're phasing in the in-season data. So yes, this most recent game, that is going to be accounted for. But remember, that's just one piece of the in-season data puzzle. And that in-season data component, that weight, is growing while the preseason is diminishing. So there are like 4 or 5 different things swirling all at once and mixing in all together, especially this early in the season. For me, especially because Tyler's going to get to the point of knowing season data here before too much, or no, preseason data before too much longer, I think. Yep. But for me, that kind of stays in throughout the season and it goes down, down, down. So it's not just, okay, where were you last week going into the games? How'd you perform in the game? And then what's the new one? I also equate this to my most deserving rankings too, which we haven't talked about all on this show. We will probably as we get later into the year and those become more informative. But as we're adding to a resume, think about it this way, Tyler. After week one in the most deserving rankings, after week one, everybody's resume, assuming you didn't play week 0 games, let's throw out Notre Dame, USC, and some of those other teams. Your resume is 100% that week 1 game. After week 2, now your week 1 game is 50% and your week 2 game is 50%. So yes, you added to it, but how much you added to it was less than how much you added from week 0 to week 1, because now it's being split. After week 3, okay, now you just added 33%, but you're also retroactively changing the weight of game 2 and game 1, and it goes on and on and on. So that's why I say these most deserving rankings become more informative as the year goes on, because it really smooths out. And each game that gets added is a smaller and smaller piece. And each previous game is weighted less and less and less as we go, as you build out a 12 or in some cases 13 game resume. So that point is synonymous with the ratings, not necessarily from the building the resume, but from the how do the factors that go into it change and evolve week over week. So very important to keep in mind. I won't belabor that anymore. Top 10 biggest upgrades for me this week. It's interesting right at the top, and I'll get to why it's interesting when I get to the downgrades. South Alabama, my number 1, they're up 5 points. Again, that 5 points, I think, is about exactly what I had as my biggest upgrader last week. But my number 2 is Boston College. And actually lost their game, Tyler. And they're your number 2 as well. They lost their game. But when you have them projected to lose by 32, and they lose by 2 against a really, really good Florida State team, at least in the eyes of the power rating model, that's actually going to improve how the model is viewing your team. So they are my number 2. They're up 4.3. So while my number 1 improvement from last week is about the same, my number 2 improvement, I think, is slightly less than my second biggest upgrade from last week. So again, we're seeing it really slow down and smooth out how much a team can move in any given week for some of those reasons that we talked about earlier. So number 2, Boston College, 3, Coastal Carolina, 4, SMU, 5, Liberty, 6, Miami of Ohio. Good win for them over Cincinnati in overtime. 7, Louisiana, 8, Arkansas State, a team that I had at the bottom of the barrel. They really showed up this week and got it done. Number 9, Fresno State, and number 10, Ball State. They're my number 10 biggest upgrade, and they are up 3 points. So there you go. Number 1's up 5, number 10 is up 3. We have really shrunk how much a team is moving any given week. Now, that's not to say after one of these upcoming weeks, a team can't move more than that. We've got some really big games coming up, and if they throttle a really good opponent unexpectedly, you can get that. But the point is, you're seeing that kind of come back towards a middle line there. So those are my 10 biggest upgrades this week, Tyler.
Yeah, and one thing that jumps out, and this has been a pretty constant theme, I think, since we started doing the show, since we started really talking about our numbers, and that's my numbers generally have been higher on G5 teams than yours. So it makes sense to me that you have more G5 teams in these biggest risers generally than I do. I mean, I still have a few in there, but South Alabama, for instance, they're number 1 for you. They didn't make they actually got downgraded in my ratings because my numbers were so high on them to begin with that beating what the model sees is a terrible Oklahoma State team, which we'll talk about in a minute. South Alabama actually got downgraded in my ratings because I had them so high to begin with. So again, just it's all relative. It's where you start and then how you perform. So that's how we can have such a discrepancy there on a team like South Alabama. So I thought that was worth pointing out. And the other thing I want to point out to, for anyone wondering, like, well, why does Tyler do it this way? Kelley does it this way in terms of the preseason ratings and things. Kelley doesn't bet. He doesn't use his numbers for betting. I have found, like, you're not going to beat odds makers at their own game, in my opinion. So what can we do? We can try to capture lightning in a bottle. We can try to capitalize on the high variance. And so my model is designed to try to get ahead of the market. So on a team like Oklahoma, who I've already bet for this week, my numbers are super high on them. I don't know that the market has quite caught up. So that I was thinking about this today. I think that's probably a big reason is I've tried to craft my formula to maybe get ahead of the market. Now, sometimes that comes back to bite me and I overvalue or undervalue a team accordingly. But again, when you're trying to cash bets and beat the market, we want to try to capitalize on some higher variance. So just wanted to throw that out there as a theory. I don't know that that's factual, but that's my working theory at the moment. But let's get into our biggest downgrades after week 3.
I like that theory, Tyler. And here I flashed it up for you. I'll let you go first. But right before you do, I like what you just outlined there, and I think it makes total sense. Since I'm not using my numbers for betting purposes, I know there are people out there that do and have had success. So they've told me. Again, I'm not seeing any of that, and I'm not allowed to, and so that's fine. As in the summers, and I know you do the same thing, as you back test the models, you get another whole season's worth of data. And it's really, really fun in the summer when you get to do all this testing and everything. It can be overwhelming and you can try to want to change too many things. So I have to like calm myself down on some of that as I get excited just talking about it. But as I back test various ways of phasing out preseason priors, get really aggressive, be super conservative, somewhere in between. There's lots of different ways that you can go about testing this. As I back tested it, the current approach that I have is what I have found to be the most predictive. And what I mean by that is it's what gives me the smallest absolute error when you back test. So what my ultimate goal here is not to beat Vegas, right? I mean, that's your ultimate goal. My ultimate goal is to get the smallest absolute error that I can. And for those that maybe, what's absolute error? If my numbers are projecting, and I'll just use the South Alabama game because I have it up on the screen for me as we get ready to talk about Oklahoma State some more. I had South Alabama projected to lose to Oklahoma State by 11. They ultimately won this game. As I try to find it, I think they won it by like 24. Tyler, is that right? It was 33-7.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, 33-7. So they won it by 24. My absolute error in that game was pretty significant. I projected 11-point South Alabama loss. They ended up winning by 24. That's a 35 in absolute error. That is horrific. That is terrible. That is not a result, as Tyler laughs at me. That is not a result that you want to have. So you want that number to be 0. If the model says South Alabama is going to lose by 11, you want South Alabama to lose by 11. And that's unrealistic. You're never going to get that. But Vegas, over the course of the year, has the best absolute error out there. That's why it is Vegas. I want to get as close to Vegas's absolute error as absolutely possible. That's what I'm trying to do. That's how I decide how to phase out my preseason prior. So again, Tyler and we're doing the same thing, but we actually have slightly different goals in the end. Now, I want people who use my numbers to be successful, and Tyler wants his absolute error to be 0. Like we both want these things, but we're choosing to try to get to those endpoints differently. So I don't know if people found that interesting or not, Tyler, but there you go. Week 3 biggest downgrades. I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a point worth making. Because again, just to put a bow on this conversation. Yes, I want my absolute error to be as low as possible. Obviously, my absolute error is good. That's not my end all be all because I want my numbers, like Kelley said, to beat Vegas. So even if I'm a little less accurate in terms of the absolute error, if that puts me in the right direction to beat the spread, then that's ultimately what I'm trying to accomplish. And it's done a good job so far this year. And in fact, our friend Andrew Percival, who puts together the picker consensus metrics, he just tweeted out earlier today on Sunday that my model's number 1 in the picker consensus in terms of straight up. So these games like Fresno State, where I have Fresno State projected as a winner, against Purdue in week 1, like those type of games where I'm like way off from the market, I'm actually doing pretty well in those. So just to put a bow on that, getting into our week 3 down.
Tyler, hang on. Now I have to put the bow on it. I love Andrew Percival. I'm not getting into that. I need to correct myself. 33 minus 7, guys, is not 24, in case anyone listening.
26, yeah.
It's 26. And you're over here thinking, wait, Kelley, you're a numbers guy, right? And so as I'm talking here, I'm like, something doesn't sound right about what I've just said. 26 plus then the 11 the other way that I had. It was really bad. That would be a 37 absolute error. So excuse me. This is why I shouldn't go off the cuff. I should try to script my things and have talking points, which I didn't hear. This is why I don't do that. So anyway, biggest downgrades. Let's get to it as my math is yikes, dude. It's been a long Sunday. We're recording this Sunday night at like 10:20 at night. It's been a long Sunday of looking at numbers. My brain is a little fried, I'll be honest.
Yeah, no, I absolutely get it. When you just stare at the screen, all evening yesterday, all day today, it happens. No big deal. So my top 10 biggest downgrades this week, Western Kentucky, like they got throttled in every aspect by Ohio State, who, as we just saw, was on my biggest upgrades. So I projected that game, Ohio State minus 27. So, Ohio State comes out and beats them by 50. So Western Kentucky, biggest loser this week. Oklahoma State, that's a team that my model really didn't like to begin with. And then they got killed by South Alabama. So they got a huge downgrade. Florida State, as Kelley mentioned, really, really bad performance against a bad Boston College team. Who I think last week I had Boston College as the worst Power 5 team. I don't think that's the case anymore. Kansas, who I took some heat, last week for my season win total projection on Kansas still, after they beat Illinois and they were looking really good. And then they beat terrible Nevada by 7. Alabama, talked about that, lost Texas last week at home by double digits. They were in a dogfight with South Florida for, 3.5 quarters here. UAB, FAU, who I mentioned, got killed by Clemson. Arizona State, who got killed by Fresno State. Mississippi State, who got killed by LSU. And Kansas State, who also lost me some money by giving up the SEC record longest field goal as time expired to lose to Missouri. They got a downgrade in my numbers as well. How about you, Kelley?
A lot of the same teams here. What I said was interesting about my upgrades is I had South Alabama and Boston College as my 2 biggest upgrades. Well, their opponents are my 2 biggest downgrades. It does not always work that way. That's why I said it was interesting. Oklahoma State is my number 1 biggest downgrade after losing 33-7. That's 26 points for the record. To South Alabama. That's 5.7 points they went down. That's the biggest downgrade this week. 24 spots they fell. That is also the largest ordinal ranking drop that I had. Florida State, my number 2 biggest faller. Cincinnati, a team that was really disappointing, overtime loss to Miami of Ohio. Brian Fermo tweeted something out about the number of drives, like 6 drives that ended inside the Miami 20 or 10, something like that. They came away with like 9 points on those 6 drives in that game. Cincinnati did. It's just absolutely horrific. Alabama, my number 4 biggest faller. But here's an example of Tyler and I's different approaches, in which I actually think Tyler's is much better in this specific instance. Alabama, while they are down 4 points for me, they are still my number 5 power rated team. And people are like, how the heck is Alabama power rated number 5? Kelley, have you watched them? They don't have a quarterback, all this, all that. Tyler says he has them number 13 right now. I have them number 5 for some of the reasons that we've talked about. The preseason priors are very, very strong for Alabama. And even though they're getting phased out every week and the weight that's assigned to them is decreasing every week, there is still a significant component of preseason value assigned to all the teams, not just Alabama. So they are Alabama. I don't think I've ever said this in my time doing power ratings. And if even retroactively, I don't know how far back I'd have to go to try to find this example. Alabama is an outlier for me right now in the negative direction. I've never said that before. Alabama has never been an outlier in the negative direction. There have been times when I'll say they're an outlier in the positive because I'm like, sure, I've got Alabama power rated at 32. That's probably not high enough because the model just can't keep up with how good they actually are on the field. This year, the model can't downgrade them fast enough after these 2 most recent performances. Let's not forget, they came out and looked really, really good in week 1 against, I think it was Middle Tennessee.
Yep.
And maybe Middle Tennessee is just really not that good. I don't know. But it's been bad for Alabama since. And if they can't figure out this quarterback situation, it's going to be a problem. Hey, hint, I think Milroe might be your best quarterback. I know we were trying something new. Yep. I'll say it didn't work. I think we got to go back to Milroe and just stick it out. I don't know. I'm not going to tell Nick Saban how to do his job. I would never do that. But that's my take after watching a very sloppy game against South Florida this past week. All right, Arizona State, number 5 down for me. Western Kentucky, 6. Michigan State, 7. UAB, 8. Mississippi State, 9. And Pitt, down 2.9 points. They are my 10th biggest downgrades this week. So again, number 1 actually got downgraded a little bit more than the number 1 upgrader, but the number 10 downgrader downgraded slightly less, just 1/10 of a point less than my 10th biggest upgrade. So there are mine. Again, a lot of similarities, Tyler, there with yours, even though we have slightly different methodology.
Yeah, I do think, again, just to kind of touch on the differences in our models, I think this stretch that we're about to enter, this next 3 to 4 weeks are where we're going to see the biggest discrepancies between our models because of I'll be completely on in-season data here in the next few weeks, whereas you will be probably like halfway through or whatever. So I think we'll see the biggest discrepancies in our numbers here coming up over this next month for sure. So I'm looking forward to that. It makes it exciting, and I love to reference your numbers because it gives me an idea of where the odds makers are going to be, so I can kind of adjust from there and look at it from a betting perspective.
I love it.
So that's our biggest risers, biggest fallers. Kelley, anything else that stuck out to you on week 3 before we put it to bed and look ahead to what's going to be a great week 4? I've got my Notre Dame background here. Can't wait for obviously the biggest game of the weekend, Notre Dame, Ohio State. It's going to be awesome. But any final thoughts here on week 3?
Week 4 is going to be great. I didn't make a graphic for it for the YouTube video. Maybe I will moving forward because I have it. I just didn't put it into our slides. I talked about some of my biggest season movers. Oklahoma up the most for me since preseason. Colorado number 2, Texas State 3, Syracuse 4, Washington 5. I've got the top 10 on my website. Biggest 5 downgrades from the beginning of the year. Arizona State down 9.7 points. Interestingly, that's what Oklahoma's up. Again, that's not going to be the case always throughout the season. It's just we've had some quirky stuff this week. North Texas, number 2. Baylor, number 3, biggest downgrader this year. Arkansas State, despite being one of the weekly risers, Arkansas State still down 4th most out of anybody since the preseason. And then Oklahoma State, after a really, really bad week, Oklahoma State is the 5th biggest downgrade I've had since the preseason. So I'll put the top 10 of those on my website. Maybe I'll throw that graphic in here next week. I don't know. But there you go. No. I'll tell you this too, Tyler. Most deserving rankings, get them out every Monday morning. This will tell you what changed and what didn't. There was a lot of movement. Of course, there's going to be this early in the season, the most deserving rankings. Those things really level set as we get going later in the year and really kind of water finds its level with those. But I'll tell you, this week 3, my top 4 teams didn't change, and the order in which they were there didn't change either for the most deserving ranking. So that just goes to show you that it solidifies what we thought. There weren't a ton of games on the week 3 slate that were huge resume boosters, right? Because we didn't have those titanic clashes. And yes, when you pull an upset, that's going to be when you upset a team, you're going to get more credit in a resume ranking than you do if you're the favorite and you win that very same game because you are supposed to win that game. The average top 25 team is supposed to win that game. If you lose that game, the team that you lost to is going to get a bigger bump. We had a couple upsets, not a ton. A couple teams with 1 loss now showing up in my most deserving top 30. So I'm excited to show those. But yeah, those are the biggest takeaways for me. It was the week that we thought it would be in almost every single respect. And it was still a great week of college football. Loved every minute of it. And try telling Missouri or Florida fans that week 3 was a sleepy week or didn't matter. Those fan bases were on cloud 9, and they should have been. And there were many, many others like that too. Miami of Ohio, South Alabama out of the group of 5s had great weeks, and they loved every minute of it. So it was awesome, dude. And you said it. Week 4 is big time. And week 5 and week 6, I am excited to see what happens with our numbers, what happens with rankings as well, because we're getting into the meat of the season now. I mean, the next time we're talking a recap, it's going to be end of September. So we blink and the season's gone. That's why we can't take them for granted, dude.
Yep, absolutely. I'm with you on that. I'll run through my biggest risers and fallers here for the season as well. I had number 1, Texas State, biggest riser. Oklahoma number 2, Duke number 3, Rutgers number 4, and Bowling Green number 5. And biggest downgrades: Arizona State, Western Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma State, and Pitt. My biggest downgrades so far this year. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Every weekend's a great weekend of college football. This next one's going to be awesome. Can't wait to be back here. Show will be out on Thursday for our week 4 look ahead. Can't wait. We may have to go long on that one. There's a ton of huge matchups coming this weekend. So can't wait to get into that and see you guys all back here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel at Saturday Glory on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, to the Calculated Risk podcast. Tell a friend. Make sure you follow Kelley and I on X. I'm at TShoeIndex. He's at KFord Ratings. So for Kelley Ford, I'm Tyler Shoemaker, and that was Calculated Risk.